Good morning, everyone. So I just want to make a quick announcement, and then Shirley will introduce our guests. So as you all know, Calgary Marathon is this weekend, and the weather is going to be fabulous, and it's going to be so great. We have a really awesome mustard seed team out running, and we're definitely still collecting pledges. So you can contribute to us individually or as a team, but we would love to have you do that, and we'll be wandering around sometime this week asking for donations still. But there's a cool element that's starting this year with the Calgary Marathon, and that's called the Charity Block Party. So all of the charities involved are going to have tents set up on 9th Ave by Studio Bell. So if you come on down anytime that day, you can cheer on our runners. All the runners run past it at the start and the end of the race. We'll have this sign-making station. We'll have noisemakers. You can check out all the charities that are involved, but it's just a really cool thing to do with your family this Sunday. So come on down anytime between 7 a.m. and 1 p.m. this Sunday to 9th Ave. It'll be super cool. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. You're looking good. You're looking really good. Before I introduce our speakers this morning, I just want to give a big shout out of thanks to our shelter staff. Lunch for a Lifetime was amazing. Not only was it a fantastic meal, but I loved what I learned. And I have a fresh appreciation for our shelter staff. So thank you so much. Well, today you're going to meet two of my favorite people. They have just been transplanted to Calgary from Waterloo 2 years ago. So if anybody here originally from Ontario, please come and say hi to them and make them feel welcome. They're still a bit in shock. So one of the things I love about Mary and Marshall is their sense of humor. Even after being in ministry for over 30 years, they still know how to have fun, and they have a great sense of humor. They are the program directors of a beautiful retreat center in Priddis, just less than an hour away from here. It's called Carrith Creek Retreat Center, and my husband and I were the first directors there, and we lived on this beautiful 66 acres, heavily wooded with a creek running through. It's pristine. And that is where Focus on the Family now owns this facility, and Marshall and Mary are the directors. So today, Marshall and Mary will teach us some of their wisdom about being intentional about taking time to be renewed. On their days off, they love to hop on their Harley and take backcountry roads, so they know how to do it. Together, their heart's desire is to come alongside other leaders to encourage, inspire them. Thank you to both of you for coming to encourage us today. Please join me in welcoming Marshall and Mary.
Good morning to those of you that I see and those of you who just see me. If I look over my shoulder, I will know that there are other people looking at me. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning here at Mustard Seed. We had a tour back a few months ago and got a greater scope of understanding about what you do here. And it's an amazing ministry. And we're just happy that we have this opportunity to speak to you. Well, how many of you have ever had somebody read a job posting and say, that was for you? That's what happened to us. That really is the story of how we got to Alberta. So I can sit down and we can just go on with your day, right? Well, on July the 22nd, 2015, Mary received an email from a lady who had been a part of our church. And it was for a job posting for Focus on the Family, as has already been said, for the directors of Carrith Creek, which is a ministry leaders retreat center. What's so important about July 22nd is that 2 days before, on the Sunday, on July 20th, we resigned a church that we had been a part of for 28 years. And we had no idea what we were going to do come what would have been September 1. We had given our notice that we would be done on August 31st. And we really thought that was something that just came out of the blue. We thought that we would retire in that church. We thought we would be buried in the city of Waterloo. Never saw anything else happening but that. But when you use God's word and you pray God's word, it's amazing how God takes you at your word and uses his word to propel you on. For months I had been praying, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths. I was praying that for the church. God was kind of smiling, I'm sure, because really he was thinking, no, you're really praying that for yourself. In July, Mary and I were returning from Nepal. We had gone in to just be a source of encouragement to a group of pastors after the devastating earthquake. And while we were returning, as we were flying back home, this rogue thought went through my mind, and it was, your days in Waterloo are over, your time has come to an end. The story's too long to go into, but just to tell you that once I realized that that was the Lord speaking to me and not the enemy, this sense of incredible peace, that although we didn't know what would happen on September 1st, settled into my heart. And when I told Mary about my experience, God had already prepared her as well. And we walked through those next 7-8 weeks and then into September with this incredible peace. We just knew that God had something in store for us that was different than being a lead pastor. We didn't know what different really looked like. But on the 22nd, when the email came, it was for this job posting, and Mary said, well, that's a little different. Well, why don't we just check it out? And we began to do so. And after a phone call with Focus, they said, we need a resume. And Mary's like, well, what's a resume? When you're 28 years in one church, who has a resume? And so we filled our resume in, and then we waited, and we waited. And on December the 22nd of 2015, we got a call asking if we'd be one of 7 couples that would go into the shortlist part of the job application. We said we would. In January, we got down to the shortest list, being 2 people. And then on February the 5th of 2016, Focus on the Family Canada invited us to be part of their family. And we said yes.
Well, some of you, the name Kerith might be a little bit familiar. Marsh said, and Shirley mentioned that we are the directors at Kerith Creek. So some of you are like, Kerith, I think I've heard that name somewhere before. Maybe others are like, no, have no clue. Well, I wanted to give you a little bit of framework. The name Kerith Creek is actually a biblical reference from the Old Testament, and it's wound around the story of Elijah from 1 Kings chapter 17. Elijah, if you know this story at all, he was a great prophet, this bigger-than-life prophet, and God had actually called him, and he said, I want you to go to the wicked king Ahab and his crazy wife Jezebel, and I want you to pronounce to them there's going to be no rain for 3.5 years. And so Elijah, called kind of out of the hills of Gilead, he shows up at the king, and he says to the king, this is what the Lord says, and it's not going to rain for 3.5 years, and not going to rain until I say it does. He turned on his heel and he left. Well, you can just imagine that Ahab and Jezebel went crazy. Well, this is 1 Kings 17, and these are the verses 3 and 5. And this is the Lord talking to Elijah just after he exits this showdown with King Ahab. The Lord says, now I want you to leave here, Elijah, and travel eastward. And I want you to hide out by the Kerith Brook, near where it enters the Jordan River. I want you to drink from the brook there and eat what the ravens bring you, for I have commanded them to bring you food. Elijah did just as the Lord said, and he camped down by the brook Kerith. Most commentaries say that probably Elijah was there for at least a year, where he just rested and the Lord provided everything he needed. So after that time, whatever it was, whether it was a year or a year and a half, after that time of the Lord just speaking to him, restoring him, and providing everything, he called him out again from that place to go back into ministry. And if you read the story, he goes and he ministers to the widow at Zarephath, and then he has this crazy showdown on Mount Carmel as he goes face to face with the prophets of Baal. It's really important to know that Kerith Creek was not meant to be this permanent dwelling place. He wasn't going to plant gardens and dig wells and set up there. It was just meant to be this temporary place of rest where Elijah could eat and drink and sleep. And that's exactly what our guests do at Kerith Creek. They eat and they drink and they sleep, and then we throw in a little bit of teaching from Marshall and I. Here's a beautiful footnote to the name Kerith Creek. In the early 2000s, John and Liz Traber from Calgary, some of you would maybe be familiar with them, they felt this great burden for pastors. and leaders, and they wanted to provide a place with them. And Shirley and her husband Carrie worked shoulder to shoulder with them, along with a lot of other people and volunteers, and they built this beautiful facility just outside Pritis. They gave themselves wholly to it, and as Shirley mentioned, Shirley and her husband Carrie were the first. They were the first everything. They were the first directors and caretakers and marketers, and they just did it all. And although I don't have all of the details, you can talk to Shirley afterwards. But my understanding is that one day Shirley was reading this story out of 1 Kings 17, and she thought, wow, I wonder if that wouldn't be a perfect name for this facility running right by the creek. And that is where the name was born. It was Shirley's idea, God-inspired idea, and that is where the name Kerith Creek came from. And Kerith Creek, just as now not just Kerith Creek, but that name that God dropped into Shirley's heart, we now have another facility in Manitoba, and that is Kerith Pines. So what it beautifully pictures is just like Elijah, where God prepared him a place where he could get away from the demands of ministry, where he could rest, catch his breath, where God could minister to him, and then go back into ministry. That's exactly what we do at Kerith Creek.
Kerith has been designed for those who are serving in pastoral ministry. We have people from parachurch organizations and global workers or missionaries who also come. These leaders come to Kerith because maybe they're tired, maybe they're discouraged, maybe they're in a tough season, they're uncertain about the future. And every so often we get some that are on sabbatical. Things are going well and they're just looking for a little re-energization. Some, as they choose to come, but we've had some that have been sent, or I should say maybe gently encouraged by some district official to attend a retreat. When we talk about what happens at Kerith, we like to use three words that all start with the letter R. They're rest, recalibrate, re-engage. Rest happens because the schedule is set up in such a way that the attendees have an opportunity to catch their breath spiritually, emotionally, physically, and mentally. There's a lot of free time. In fact, you don't even make meals. We have a host couple that takes care of that as well. There's also rest is found during our private sessions when Mary and I will have an opportunity with the guests to just allow them to unburden themselves and tell us their story and what is taking place in their world. What's interesting is as we listen to the guests over the 2 years we've been there, we find that this aspect of recalibration can happen anytime through the week. It can happen as they're just going through a binder that's been prepared for them. It can happen during one of the teaching sessions, and Mary and I, as we go through the week, we'll deal with things such as grief and loss and burnout and expectation. We talk about just a few other things as well, but that kind of gives you it in a nutshell. We've also found that recalibration happens when people are just silent, when they just have an opportunity to listen to what the Spirit of God is saying to them. We found that recalibration happens early in the week, but we've also seen where recalibration has happened on the very last session. Well, once our guests have had a chance to rest and recalibrate, we find that they are ready to re-engage in their God-directed ministry. They have greater hope, they have greater vision, and they have greater passion.
Well, we know that it's not just leaders and teachers and pastors that find themselves discouraged and need some time to rest and regroup. And the truth is, this morning, for all of you, no matter where you've come from, no matter your age, your occupation, whether you're a male, you're a female, no matter what your story is or what you think your future will be, you all need rest. Self-care is not selfish, and we know as we look around society that it is becoming one of the catchphrases because we realize how important and how valuable it is. Some people say, and we've heard it said, well, I'd rather burn out than rust out. And the truth is, my friend, either way, you're out.
If you're still not convinced that self-care is something that you need to participate in, let me use this illustration. First of all, let me ask, is there anybody here that I can see that you've never flown? Okay. So every one of you has sat through that wonderful demonstration before the plane taxis to the runway. You sit and listen about how you have to buckle the seatbelt, right? But there's one aspect of that presentation that they are most concerned about that you understand fully. And they talk about the fact that if there was ever a loss of cabin pressure, there's going to be an oxygen mask that's going to fall down from above your head. And the requirement is that you put your mask on before you help anybody else. I asked a flight attendant one time, I said, how much time do I have if I went to help somebody? And they said, you'd have less than 5 seconds. No wonder you need to put your own mask on first before you can help anybody. And isn't that just like life? We need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. You see, in certain occupations, the very nature of the job, the mandate of the business is centered on caregiving. You're a part of Mustard Seed. You care for people through just a couple of lines just off your vision statement. You care for people through sustained life change for the most vulnerable. There's a lot of care that goes into making sure that the most vulnerable are cared for. But as Mary said, caregivers are also found amongst those who take care of aging parents, sick spouses, or challenged children. Here's some information about caregivers. When caregivers are overwhelmed by their role, they begin to suffer what is called role fatigue. 1 in 3 caregivers reports feeling depressed. This is according to a 2009 Medsburg nursing article. Depression is a serious psychological condition and can lead to caregiver burnout. I thought this was really unique. The impact of social isolation on caregivers' health is comparable to the biomedical risk factors of smoking. This is according to a 2006 article in the Gerontologist. Many caregivers report feeling they are alone. Feelings of isolation and reduced social interaction increase mortality. Caregivers have higher mortality and other adverse health outcomes than non-caregivers, according to a 2006 article in Psychological Bulletin. Well, is there anything that can be done? Anything that can help caregivers?
Well, this is a huge topic, and we obviously just have a limited amount of time. But I want to ask you a question this morning. I think if we were to throw it open, and I said to you, well, tell me what your stressors are. What are those things in life that deplete you? We find that with the guests at Carith, when we ask them that question, they're like, oh, it's easy. They say things like, unrealistic expectations, or I have too much to do in a shorter period of time, or I have health issues. And so those are the things that we're hearing. Busyness, technology is driving me crazy. It's great to be connected, but I can't get disconnected. And so those are the things that deplete us. What happens, though, when we ask the question of our guests, we say, okay, we know what depletes you. What fills you up? They're like, and there's this long, pregnant, awkward pause because no one's really sure. We get what depletes, but we don't know what fills us up. So I want to ask you a question this morning, and for 15 seconds, I want you to think about it. If you had a whole afternoon to yourself and no one to report to, what would you do? Now for 15 seconds, I'd like you to turn to the person beside you, and I'd like you to tell them what you would do if you had a whole afternoon to yourself.
Well, you're to be applauded here at the Mustard Seed because I want you to know there's been a lot of chatter, and it sounds like a lot of you know what you would do if you had an afternoon to fill you up. Interestingly, a lot of people think, well, if I'm going to have rest, if I'm really going to take care of myself, this whole topic of self-care, what I need to do is book myself a 2-week vacation, like on a Caribbean cruise or something, or maybe a secluded cabin somewhere. And yet most of us either don't have the resources or the time or the schedule to do that. So the question we have to ask and then answer ourselves in this crazy life that we live, how are we going to fill ourselves up? With all of the things to deplete us, what things are we going to do intentionally to fill us up? So find out what fills you up and then do those things on a regular basis.
You know, coming from a pastor, I'm a pastor's kid, and then, you know, we pastored for 35 years in Ontario, 28 years at one church. I found it really hard to realize and acknowledge my own desires and my own needs, because it feels so selfish. Like, really? I mean, you're a mom and you're a pastor's wife and you're this and you're that, and there's expectations, and what I found is that we start believing that God only wants us to do the really hard things, the difficult things, the things that we don't really want to do, but they sound spiritual, and so we do them. And I want you to know that God cares about, and he wants you to be intentional about focusing on what brings you joy and life. We're wired as emotional beings, and he wants you to know what brings you joy. So lean into what fills you up. That really is a picture of self-care, and it's going to be important for you in this place and job that you find yourself in. I want you to know that self-care doesn't have to be complicated or expensive or time-consuming. In Waterloo, I loved puttering around in my garden. We had moved into this one house, and we'd been there 16 years. It was the house we actually left when we came to Calgary. But when we moved in, the backyard was just grass. And so over the period of several years, I was able to cut in a shape of a garden, and then plant by plant, I was able to plant it the way I wanted it, the color I wanted it, so that it would bloom at the right times of year. And when I look back, I loved just digging in my garden. I would go out for several hours and dig, and I would watch things grow. And if there were cardinals, which nobody told me, you don't have cardinals in Calgary before I came, so that was not good. So I have a fake red bird on my fence. But so I loved that. That was like the perfect day for me. And I realized that nature fills me up in a way that nothing else did. So if I was asked that question, I would say I would spend an hour in my garden. Here was the problem. When we moved to Alberta, they wouldn't let me bring my garden on the moving truck. So I had to leave it in Ontario. And when we came here, there was no gardens. And I didn't think too much about it until about a year in. We were here, and we started doing this study on self-care. And I realized that garden in Waterloo filled me up. And not having it, I was empty in Calgary. And it seems bizarre that really it was that big an adjustment. It was a huge adjustment to me. And when Marshall and I realized it, now this little bit of self-care did take a little bit of money for us. We just decided we're going to put in a patio. It's just this little tiny space. And I'm going to cut in a little garden, and it's little. I think I only have maybe 6 or 7 perennials in there now. But I want you to know that. And Marshall, bless his heart, built me a swing. And for a couple of hours every night in nice weather, I'll go out with a coffee and a book, and I'll swing on my swing, and I'll just watch my flowers in my perennial garden. And it fills me up in a way that nothing else does. So here's your homework as we're closing today. I want you, and Shirley's going to make sure that you did this. So I want you today or tomorrow, the next couple of days, I want you to take a piece of paper, and I want you to write yourself a list of things that fill you up. Those things that maybe you've just been too busy to do before, not had enough time. It seemed like a waste of time. It was foolish. This is more important. I need to be serving here. I need to be doing there. I want you to make a list of those things that fill you up. And then I want you to lean into them, and I want you on a regular basis to begin to do those things, because that, my friend, is self-care. And that matters. And God cares about those things. Well, as we close today, Marshall's going to hand out these, I guess they're, I don't know, I don't want to call them evaluations, because that sounds like a test in junior high, and we want to avoid that at all costs. But this is a little exercise that was actually, his name isn't on it, but it was written by Bob Paul, and it comes out of the marriage intensives that we do at Careth Creek. And it looks at physical self-care, mental self-care, spiritual self-care, and emotional self-care.
And it's a way actually just to quiet yourself with a cup of coffee somewhere. This is not to be done in a rush. This is just you and the Lord quietly going through this and taking a look at your life across the landscape, the spectrum of your life, because we're more than just physical beings, folks. And find out how you're doing physically. Are you taking care of yourself physically? What about your mental self-care? And you'll see that there's a scale, 1 to 25. When I was doing this, I wasn't necessarily coming in at a 5 or a 15 necessarily, but maybe a 7. Or so it's somewhere on this spectrum. You're actually grading yourself. And then spiritual self-care, and the bottom is emotional self-care. I loved it when we first were introduced to this because the person who was teaching, he said, I don't want you to think this is I have to do more. Like, okay, I've got to get this right. I've got to work harder at this. It's actually as you're going through this, knowing that your Father wants you to be well and healthy in every area of your life. And for those of you that are watching, we're going to be sending those out to you so that you can take a look at them too. So that's our hope for you, and that's our prayer for you. And we want to encourage you and come alongside you here at the Mustard Seed and say, God's doing an amazing thing for you, through you, and we're really excited to at least be able to step in every once in a while and encourage you and let you know that what you do here matters. And in all of that, taking care of yourself matters too.
Would you join me in saying thank you to Marshall and Mary? Thank you. And yes, we will email those handouts to everyone else. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. See you next week.